You are live.
Great. Thank you, Teresa. Welcome, everyone. This is House Rules meeting on Thursday, April 3rd. On our agenda today, we have a resolution that was referred to us, which is HR 6. And so the plan for today is to have the sponsor, Representative Lalone, give us an introduction to the resolution, and then we will have our House Clerk do a walkthrough. So with that, Representative Lalone, it's a little cozy in here, but you're good.
This is going to be like showing my balls.
You can
On the camera.
Okay, I can help you out. It's not my best eye.
Did you want to sit? So you could sit here if you wanted.
I'm okay with it.
Okay.
Hello, representative from South Burlington, chair of the House Judiciary Committee, and more importantly, chair of for this purpose, chair of the House Ethics Panel, my second biennium in this role. So this really started last year, early last year, actually into the summer, that we started thinking about how we might be more transparent. And really it started with a particular issue that became fairly well known publicly, involving one of our members. And we couldn't neither confirm nor deny that we had an ethics complaint in that situation, or have any kind of public comment of what we're doing. So that really kind of kicked off just generally looking at some issues of transparency. And one of the things that this resolution would do would allow the panel, if there is a public matter, that we would be able to have limited comment to explain that, yeah, we're looking at this, we're doing a restorative justice process, pretty general without getting into details. But backing up, so the way the panel works is that we get a complaint and we pass it on to the respondent, and the respondent can get the assistance of counsel for one of our, there's like 2 legislative counsel, I think there's now 3, who will defend the person, and we'll have in 2 weeks will provide us with a response, and we provide the response to the complainant, and then we deliberate and decide what to do, and we can either find that there is no reasonable grounds for an ethics violation. We can do a stipulation and consent order where we try to have corrective processes for an individual, or we can go to a hearing, and if after the hearing we find that there was an ethical violation, we have a resolution that goes to the full body. The resolution would be either a reprimand or a censure or even an expulsion. We have the ability to do that. To my knowledge, I don't think we've ever gone to a hearing. We have gone to having stipulations. We did a restorative process last year that did eventually involve a stipulation as well. But in any event, so the complainant and respondent, they are not obligated to confidentiality. They can talk to the press. They can do whatever they want. And the panel, though, is really very restrictive as what we can do. It hasn't really happened on our side where a complainant or respondent goes out and publicizes. It has happened on the Senate side where a complaint against one of the senators was found to not be an ethical violation, and the complainant went to the press and explained that, and that was fine. But their panel would not be able to say anything about it. And if we ever had that situation, we really wouldn't be able to say much about it either. But so we started looking at other ways we could be more transparent. Once we kind of started looking at this issue, we looked at with Betsy Ann and with Mike and Brady and the 5 members last year, and there were a few things that we've decided to do. And we could have done some of them in our procedures, but decided, particularly for one of them, which I'll get to, that it would be better to actually have it in a resolution, have it changed to the rules, and have it go before the whole body. So essentially what this does, I think the non-controversial ones I don't even know if the third one's really, the last one's really controversial, but it is the one that led us to going this route. But right now, there's there's confidentiality and no exception to the confidentiality for us, for staff or the panel members to communicate with the other panels, harassment and discrimination panels. And there can be overlap. Just from what I've seen, there's some that were in front of us that I'm kind of curious if in fact there wasn't one in the other panel as well. So this would allow that kind of communication to occur from the ethics panel to those panels. My understanding is those panels will be changing their procedures to allow that to go both ways. And I don't think it will require change to rule for them. But we decided to put all of our transparency stuff in this rule. The second, I already mentioned being able to make comments in public, if it is a public issue. But also we have some exceptions for confidentiality if there's an investigation going to law enforcement. But the main one, and I think the main one that really shows some transparency of the ethics panel, is having a concluding closing statement. So right now we do have an obligation where we say that we've had a complaint. And that's about all we can say. We can say something very general about it, and that's something we provide to the Ethics Commission. But this would actually would allow us, without naming names, but to say, here was the complaint. Here was essentially what a complaint was, and here's how we resolved the complaint. We found that it was not a violation for the following reasons, or we went to a stipulation and consent order. So. I mean, if it does go all the way through for a finding, it does become public because it becomes a resolution that goes through before the whole body. But for those other times, and that's mostly how they're resolved, is either they're not really an ethics complaint. Sometimes when we find that it's not an ethics violation, we still give a warning to kind of watch yourself on this kind of area. But just being able to show that we're doing that work and we're keeping our people accountable and we're looking at this. Being able to explain generally what the complaint is and what the resolution is really, I think, the heart of this, or at least in my view, the most important component of what this is. And that's really why we wanted to bring it to the Rules Committee and to the whole body, because I think people should understand that we're being more transparent. We base this on, and I believe that Betsy Ann has provided online some examples of the Judicial Conduct Board and the Professional Responsibility Office. I always put that one wrong. Anyway, so they do this. They had, so we looked at some examples. One of the concerns could be, well, we're 150 people. We have those out there. People are going to be snooping and such, and they're going to figure it out. I don't think that's really that huge of a concern. I mean, the Judicial Conduct Board is dealing with 40 judges, and you probably could figure out who they're talking about, but still, I think it's important for that transparency there. I think it should be important. So that's all. I'm happy to answer questions, and Betsy Ann will catch on everything that I missed in my discussion.
All right, high level questions for Representative Malone before we go to Betsy Ann. Representative Clay?
Yep, sure. Oh, did you want Betsy Ann to go first?
Well, she's going to go through
Okay.
and walk through. Maybe that would be helpful. Okay. Are you able to stay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, wonderful. All right.
Thank you.
Let's bring up our House Clerk, Betsy Ann Raz.
Okay, thank you. Hello. Thank you. For the record, Betsy Ann Rath, Clerk of the House, and thank you to Teresa, who has posted these documents on your legislative webpage, and thank you to our House Ethics Panel Chair, who laid it out really well, the purpose of HR 6. So as the Chair has stated, I, along with Michael O'Grady, are co-counsel to the House Ethics Panel. And so what we have done on behalf of the House Ethics Panel is look at other confidentiality and disclosure provisions in similar regulatory entities in the state. And as the chair had stated, that includes the Supreme Court, Vermont Supreme Court's Judicial Conduct Board. So similar to the House, which has the authority to judge member qualifications pursuant to the Vermont Constitution, the Supreme Court of Vermont has similar authority to have disciplinary control over judicial officers and attorneys at law in the state. And so they are similar to the House in having that duty to regulate the ethical conduct of its members. So the House Ethics Panel has looked at the provisions that the Supreme Court uses to regulate judges. And then we have also turned, as the chair said, to Office of Professional Regulation, which regulates approximately 53 professions. And then our Vermont Criminal Justice Council regulates all of our law enforcement officers. And so they have a similar duty to professionally regulate and uphold the ethical standards of our law enforcement officers in the state. And so we have turned to them along with other state legislatures, and specifically our neighboring New Hampshire provided some helpful potential language for this body to consider, your House Rules Committee to consider for amending the House Ethics Rule. So, Madam Speaker, we have provided here 2 reference docs. Is it okay if I do a share screen first to just give some background on what we looked at?
Absolutely.
Super. So thank you to Teresa for providing these docs. They are on your House Rules Committee webpage. And now let's see if technology, the user, can make this happen. All right, I love it when there's no user error. All right, so what is behind me now is one of those reference docs. And so I won't go through these in detail, but these are the things that the House Ethics Panel has been reviewing, as our chair just mentioned to you. So here are some of the Supreme Court's rules on confidentiality and disclosure provisions. So they have in their disciplinary control of judges rules, a Rule 6, which provides general provisions and in part addresses what remains confidential and then what is publicly disclosed. And so we have turned to some of these provisions. In big picture, it's pretty similar vein throughout the state for the Supreme Court, for OPR, for our Criminal Justice Training Council, that it is unfair to, when there is no finding of unethical conduct, to make public the identity of someone who's complained about if the person was not found to have committed unethical conduct, but conversely, to provide a measure of disclosure so that the public can understand what these regulatory entities have been reviewing and how they have administered the complaints that have been given to them. And so our Vermont Supreme Court is no different. So here you can see in their Rule 6 that they do have confidentiality for the complaints that they receive, but there are provisions in, for example, this subdivision 12 that allows our Vermont Supreme Court, let's see if I can make this bigger, our Vermont Supreme Court to make public statements when there is publicity about an investigation. That's in subdivisions 12 and 13 and 14. And we found actually through our research that it seems like there is perhaps a model law or model rules, because we found similar language in New Hampshire's ethics rules that you'll see in a moment. So this is our Vermont Supreme Court rules, just for reference here. And their duty to maintain a registry of complaints and how they were handled. And here is something that we looked at specifically, is the Vermont Supreme Court's Rule 11 on closure reports. So this provides a closure report for every complaint that they have received. And so you can see that their closure report shall not identify the complainant, the judge, or any other person by name, but contains a summary of the complainant's allegation and the resolution of the case. And if it was dismissed, the reasons therefor. And so what we provided here, and we thank the Judicial Conduct Board for being able to provide us with an example of one of their closure reports. And this is on page 3 of this reference doc that I provided. So you can see that this provides, does not identify the judge at issue, but it describes that they received a complaint. And in this case, they issued the judge a non-public written warning. And they described kind of their deliberation of the case. This was in regard to scheduling hearings during the COVID-19 pandemic, but they issued this closure report for this judge, and this was just one example. For OPR again regulates approximately 53 professions, and they have a statute on confidentiality. And so it has a similar vein where it starts out with an introductory language about protecting the reputation of licensees from unwarranted complaints, but also to fulfill the public's right to know of action taken against the licensee when there has been a determination of unprofessional conduct. So you'll see similarly that OPR has to maintain a registry of all complaints so the public knows that what the OPR has been doing as far as accepting complaints, but only when there have actually been a filing of disciplinary charges does the identification of the respondent become public, and then the final disposition of that charge. And I've highlighted here just some of you'll see these again, these provisions that are highlighted have been incorporated in some way into HR 6 that you have before you. What we provided here on page 10 is an example of an OPR closing report where there's been no charges. So similar, picking up on what the chair had mentioned before, with 53 license types, I mean, however many thousands of licensees that the OPR regulates is slightly different than our 150 representatives. I guess it depends also on the profession that's being regulated, but this is an example of a closure report where the OPR found no unprofessional conduct here for this nursing professional. So you can see that it describes what the complaint was about, and then the rationale for closing the report. On page 7, this is an example of a OPR strong closing, where this isn't the ability of OPR boards and its advisor professions to issue a closing report that's strong, meaning they did think that unprofessional conduct did happen, but they were closing the complaint, and that could happen because it was so minor in nature, or there was just not enough evidence to support it if they had to go to a hearing, for example. But these strong closing reports provide that the complaint can be reopened in the future, and that's something that we took note of. And then finally, we provided an example here in this document of the statute, very similar to OPR's, for the Vermont Criminal Justice Council and its regulation of our law enforcement officers. It's actually, this statute was based very similarly on OPR statute, again, requiring registry of all complaints and then only identifying the licensee, or in this case, the certified law enforcement officer, if there were charges filed, and then the final disposition. So we considered these as potential language for the House Ethics Panel to consider in amending its ethics provisions. Now, one thing I'll just mention here, does this work? Let's see, do I have to go back? Oh, it does work, all right. I'll just mention here, this document, I don't have it, I did not send it to you because this is the House Ethics Panel's current procedure for handling ethics complaints, but you can find this on the Ethics Panel's webpage. But I'll just note for you here that the Ethics Panel has been updating its procedures for a while now, and we have turned to the Vermont Supreme Court's regulation of judges for some of our provisions for the ethics panel on how what actions that the House Ethics Panel can take in regard to complaints. And so I'll just note here that the House Ethics Panel has already updated its procedures in regard to some of the discipline that it can, or actions it can take in regard to complaints. And that's here on this provision on page 2. But what I'll just point out for you here is that some of the confidentiality provisions of the House Ethics Panel are currently set forth in its procedure. And so, as the chair mentioned, one of the things that would be happening in HR 6 is we'd be moving, or you would be moving, some of the confidentiality provisions that are currently in the House Ethics Panel procedure over to the rules. So it'd be the House actually amending its rules to codify in your House Ethics rule some of these confidentiality provisions as they relate to the new provisions that are proposed by the members of the Ethics Panel in HR 6. So, Madam Speaker, now take us over to that. The other doc that Teresa posted for you is an annotated version of HR 6. So this goes through HR 6 as introduced by, and it's offered by all of the members, all 5 members of our House Ethics Panel, and it would amend House Rule 90B, which is the House's ethics rule. So it just provides the entire rule for you here. And it's annotated here to show you where this potential language is coming from, so you can have that information for reference. So the first change is on page 2, and it's just a technical update to refer more generally to the procedure of the panel. So we're using standard terminology throughout. Right now, this is the only place in the rule where it names specifically the House Ethics Panel procedure for handling ethics complaints. Other times it's just referred to more plainly as procedure of the panel. So this is just a technical correction to maintain that consistent terminology throughout. But here, on new subsection D that is proposed is the first substantive change. So you'll see here, this subdivision D is based in part on our Vermont Supreme Court's disciplinary control of judges Rule 614, which I provided a hyperlink to here in the comments section, and you also have it on your cross-reference document. And it's also based on New Hampshire Legislative Ethics Committee Procedural Rule 3V, which you can also link to from that comment if you want to check it out. And this seems to come from a model rule because the Supreme Court rule and the New Hampshire Ethics Rule are very similar. So this would be the first substantive change. This would provide that if a complaint before the panel or the pendency of an investigation by the panel is generally known to the public through independent sources, and the subject matter of the complaint is of broad public interest or speculation, and public confidence in the panel's administration of this ethics rule or the panel procedure may be threatened. Public confidence might be threatened because of the lack of information concerning the status of the investigation. The panel may issue a brief statement as it may deem appropriate to confirm the existence of the investigation, to clarify the procedural aspects of it, and to explain that the respondent is entitled to due process. So that's very similar to what New Hampshire has and similar to what our Vermont Supreme Court has. The next substantive provision is that closure report that the chair had mentioned. So this would require the panel to issue a closure report regarding the final disposition of each complaint submitted to the panel. And using similar language that you saw in the Vermont Supreme Court's Rule 11 about its closure reports, it would provide that the closure report shall not identify the complainant, respondent, or any other person by name, but it shall contain a summary of the complaint allegations, the final disposition of the complaint, and the basis therefor. And the panel would be required to maintain this closure report in a registry on its webpage. Then the next subdivision G goes into the overall confidentiality requirements of the panel. So it would provide that except as provided in these rules and in the panel procedure, 1, members of the panel and its staff shall keep confidential any info received and any records produced or acquired in accordance with the ethics rule or the panel procedure, provided that the panel may disclose information and records received as follows. So first, just noting here that this is taking this overall confidentiality requirement that's currently set forth in the panel procedure and codifying it here with these new exceptions. Roman numeral 1 and 2 are both based on OPRs and the Criminal Justice Training Council's ability to provide information to a court competent jurisdiction pursuant to a court order, and to a state or federal law enforcement agency in the course of the agency's investigation, provided the agency agrees to maintain the confidentiality of the info or records provided. And hyperlink there to the 2 similar provisions that are permissible for OPR and the Criminal Justice Training Council. Next, another exception to the confidentiality rule is that ledge-specific ability to share information with our discrimination prevention panel or the sexual harassment prevention panel that the chair just mentioned, provided the members agree to maintain the confidentiality of the info or records provided. Next provision of this confidentiality language is saying taken from our current ethics panel procedure that all records produced or acquired are not subject to the Public Records Act. That would be putting it into our ethics rule. It currently exists in the panel procedure. And then finally, this new H is taken from your current ethics rule. I'm just re-lettered. Here is the panel's current requirement to annually report to the House the number of complaints filed and their disposition and the number of member requests for ethical advice. That's a current requirement of the panel. You can find all of the ethics panel's annual reports on our webpage. But one update to this language is to also provide a general description of the topic of each complaint. And the panel is recommending this to correspond to a new statutory provision that was passed in last year's ethics bill that purports to require the ethics panel to report to the Vermont State Ethics Commission a general description of the topic of each complaint that the panel handled that was referred by the commission. And so to maintain consistency between that statutory request for that information of the commission, it would make sense to amend our House rule to allow that general description of the topic of each complaint to be reported to the commission. And that is the end of it, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. All right, let's open it up for questions. Representative McCoy?
Yeah, so, will the sexual harassment prevention panel have to, I think all three of these panels tried to kind of do the same thing throughout. And now that this one is being amended, I mean, I have concerns about the sexual harassment panel having to go public with this, if it's known or it gets around, like things get around in this house. I don't know if the sexual harassment panel, people would be less likely to come to them knowing that this would be in the, do you know what I mean?
I'll just note here that this would only impact the House Ethics Panel.
Okay.
I don't know if the chair wanted to mention something.
We had discussions with the discrimination panel and the sexual harassment panel, and made very clear that we felt that this probably doesn't work for those
Right.
panels.
Okay.
I really don't think they
Okay,
can.
All right, that was
The one other thing that they had a concern about, and I believe that we've satisfied their concern, but there could be room for an amendment to this resolution. Thank you for bringing that up. It reminds me, is they were concerned with respect to the closure report.
yes.
That we do not say anything about what we've learned from them.
Yeah.
We thought this was sufficient, but we can look at that a little bit
Okay.
further. And actually, I thought in my conversation with them that we would make that very clear in our procedures, because we can still have procedures as well. I mean, I think the intent was very clear that there wouldn't be passing information that was received from either of those panels, but we can make it very clear in procedures. I don't think it actually requires an amendment to the resolution.
Okay, that was my main concern, having served on those people forever and a day. So
Yeah. Other questions for our House Clerk or Representative Wolf?
And this, I do, I mean, this last one, this annually, that's the general description of the topic of each complaint is in there because we passed the ethics upgrade last year.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Give folks one more minute. Representative Dolan, do you have any questions?
I am all set. Thank you.
Okay,
It's the one more,
Go
is are the sexual harassment prevention panel and or the discrimination panel upgrading their I mean, obviously
Yeah.
sexual harassment isn't, but is the discrimination panel attempting to do the same?
I think just in their procedures, they're talking about the sharing with other panels. I don't think they plan on doing any of the other things that we have in here.
Okay.
all right. Thank you, Betsy.
Thank you.
All right, we'll now move to committee discussion. Do you feel like you would like some more time to sit with this? Would you like to hear from other witnesses? Do you feel ready to vote? How are members feeling?
I
go ahead.
can understand the ethics panel's concern about wanting to have a little more transparency. I think there might be, public out there asking for something and then you're stuck and you can't say anything, that's kind of a little awkward.
Yeah.
So I think this is a good path forward. Give some minimum information. Yep, we're talking about it, but that's it, folks. And then a closure report, I think is a very good idea.
Yeah.
In terms of describing the results. They actually did something.
Or didn't.
Or didn't, but yeah,
Right.
they didn't ignore
They did.
some rumor that was out there. They actually looked at it. Right.
Sounds good. You're good. Representative 2, Representative Boyd, Representative Bartholomew.
I'm Good with it, yeah.
Representative Boyd, do you want more time or?
No, I mean, I understand where they're coming from, especially with an ethics. Like my real main concern is the sexual harassment prevention and that it's not gonna go down this path. Right, it can't go down this path because nobody will ever.
Right.
Man,
Sure.
yeah.
Should we move forward with the motion?
And it couldn't go down this path without a similar resolution coming to us.
Right, I know, yeah.
I'll make the motion that we move HR 6.
Great, thank you. Any further discussion?
Just a clarification.
Sure.
We approve this resolution and then it does go to the floor
It
for a
does.
vote on the floor.
Yes, that's correct. All right. I will call the roll. Representative Bartholomew,
Yes.
Representative Dolan, would you like to vote remotely and use one of your days on this?
Yes, I would. And my vote is yes. Thanks.
Thank you. Representative Felton,
Yes.
Representative Houghton. Yes. Representative McCoy,
Yes,
Representative Tooth,
Yes.
and I am a yes. Passes 7-0. Thank you very much. Who would like to be the reporter of the resolution?
John.
Why is everybody looking at me?
You're like this
Bartholomew,
again.
you've done such a great job reporting resolutions for the House rules.
Your name begins with a B, so that's yours.
I do have a question. Is this gonna be, how are we gonna handle it on the floor?
Go ahead.
So it was treated like a bill. That's why it's officially in the House Rules Committee as a standing committee. So you have just voted to report favorably. So it will go on tomorrow's notice calendar. And then be for second reading on Friday and third reading.
Tuesday.
Excuse me. Oh, sorry. Oh, I love it. I love it. Second reading on Tuesday, third reading on Wednesday.
So all of this has to be reported by me because sometimes you would read that, but you won't be reading.
Right, it got its first reading and it was
Right.
treated as
Yes, I
bill and
remember
referred to this committee, so we'll get a second reading by title. And then speaker will say, member from Parliament.
And just to be clear, if I get interrogated, I will probably refer to the chair of the ethics panel.
That would be fine.
Chair will have your back as well as other committee members, I'm
Yeah,
sure if need be. Yeah. All right, thank you. So that concludes this order of business. I will follow up. I know we're at time and folks have to get back to committees and meetings. But I will be just checking in with each one of you to see if there are any other topics that you want to have come to this committee, and if you want any further discussion on the last resolution or bill that was referred to us around electronic voting. So we haven't lost track of that. So we'll come back to it, but just wanted to flag that for all of you. So with that, that wrapped up our meeting. Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.